thank you for joining us. Welcome, my friends, and thank you for turning up when it is such glorious weather out there. I hope you're all staying cool. I'm Harmeet Chagger. I'm head of innovation at the Space, and I'm a British Indian woman with straight, shouldered, dark brown hair with highlights. And I'm wearing a blue t-shirt, and I'm in a white room, and there's a blue picture on the wall. And there might be a poster behind me that you might see. Okay. So, AI, right? We can't put it back in the box. Not a day goes by when there's not a new headline on how it's revolutionizing or taking over another sector or another industry around us. It feels as though Thanos from the Marvel Universe might say that it was inevitable. Or for all you Star Trek fans out there, the Borg would say resistance is futile. MIT's report, Your Brain on ChatGPT, that was published last year, showed that individuals who rely heavily on LLMs like ChatGPT for writing and problem solving face a significant cognitive decline, memory loss, and a reduced level of thinking. Okay, whoops. But as we skip merrily or step rather reluctantly into the age of intelligence, the World Economic Forum this year predicted that AI will displace 92 million roles by 2030. That's only 4 years away, but will also create 170 million new jobs. And while the market continues to see an avalanche of new, incredibly powerful Gen AI and creative production tools, in the UK, there is still no law to protect your face or voice from being replicated without your consent. And the government's follow-up consultation on deepfakes is expected to happen this summer. So it's tempting, isn't it, to either want to run for the comfort of a dark cave and watch the beautiful shadows flickering on the walls instead, or to run towards the next tech evolution with arms fully open, ready to embrace rapid change and levelling up of what the future brings. Whatever you feel, one thing is true, that artists are and have always been disruptors and provocateurs, using these tools to break the box and make work that couldn't have existed before, work that's more ambitious, more immersive, more technically complex than their budgets would have previously allowed, and that critically questions our ever complex relationship to tech. So, over the next 1 hour and 25 minutes, you'll hear from 4 artists who are working at the bleeding edge of AI and art. And you'll hear what they've been doing, what feels right, the opportunities and challenges that they face, and the questions that keep them up all night. Okay, well, we might not get that far, but don't be surprised if we do get onto tech billionaires and their vision for a transhumanist merge. But I'm only joking about that. We definitely will have to leave that for another webinar. So over to the artists, and I'm going to bring in, first of all, Alan Warburton. Alan,
Hello.
hello, how are you? Alan is an applied media theorist and artist working with CGI, AI, XR, VR, and machine learning between art, industry, and academia. Alan, over to you to tell us a little bit more about yourself and tell us about Image Empire, why you made it, and what was the bigger conversation you hoped it would start.
Thank you very much. So I'm an artist, animator, and a video essayist who's been working with synthetic images, the tech that everyone loves to hate, for about 20 years now. Visually, I'm a middle-aged, white-haired, pink-skinned man with headphones and a beard. So Image Empire is a recent project that I released earlier this year. It was a short handmade animation about synthetic images and the fusion between computer graphics and computer vision. Another way of describing it is an origin story of NVIDIA, the graphics card manufacturer, or a kind of fairy tale about post-truth media. And the weird thing about this project was that I launched it on LinkedIn. And the idea there was that because AI is disrupting the creative industries and LinkedIn is the home of both the disruptor, AI CEOs, etc., and those being disrupted, people losing their jobs who work in the creative industries, that my film could speak to both audiences with a common story about their shared interests. And it kind of worked and it kind of didn't, but it was a fun project and a worthwhile experiment. And lots of people have enjoyed it. So that's good.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alan. If you haven't seen Image Empire, you should. It's a visual feast and all made by humans, and asks lots of really interesting and critical questions as well as giving lots of information. Thank you, Alan. I'm now going to bring Shahani in. Hi,
Hello.
Shahani. Hi, Shahani is a award-winning immersive producer and director who's based in London and is passionate about innovative forms of storytelling that combine documentary practice with new technologies. Shani, can you tell us a bit more about yourself and tell us what compelled you to make Vocalize and what impact you wanted it to have on audiences?
Thanks, Harmeet. Yes, so I am just visually, I'm a British Sri Lankan woman with sort of wavy shoulder length hair and sitting in a office with some bookshelves behind me that are a bit blurred out. Um, Yeah, so my background, I guess, originally was journalism. So I've come through the mill with the BBC and the Guardian for sort of 10, 12 years. And then about 10 years ago, I moved into immersive storytelling, largely actually sort of narrative, documentary, VR and AR. And I've always been interested in how technology can kind of change the way you're telling stories and how you can be more immersed within them. So Vocalize is a bit of a departure for me, but I've worked with two good friends of mine, Francesca Panetta and Halsey Bergend, um, who had similarly made a piece about deep fakes a couple of years before called An Event of Moon Disaster. And it was at that time that deep fakes were really starting to proliferate and the technology was really moving at speed. So for Vocalize, we kind of thought, what would it feel like to hear yourself being cloned? You know, we've seen these famous people, we've seen Tom Cruise, the Pope, but actually, and the uncanny valley was still happening. It was still quite hard to get a really good deepfake visual, but the audio had come on in kind of leaps and bounds. And so, how could you kind of beguile people into an experience whereby, it's something theatrical, something fun, but at the end of which they hear themselves cloned? And so Vocalize was born, went through various iterations, but it's a spoof voice agency. We set it up at the Hay Festival last year. And we invited people to come and be trained by the great Stephen Fry in voice acting work. We managed to get Stephen on board, who's very passionate about kind of AI in the future. And he himself was cloned, so it was kind of close to his heart. And effectively, you sit in a soundproof booth. It's a one-on-one experience. Stephen introduces himself, he plays a little video, says, I'd be delighted to train you, but I'm very busy. I'm going to hand you over to my AI clone. And then you have AI Stephen, who takes you through these various little training exercises, at the end of which he says, great, we've got everything, oh, and we've managed to already, match you up with some clients. And here are 3 videos for you to watch. And of course, here we've cloned your voice, and you're hearing yourself really endorsing some dubious products, promoting a course on consent for the manosphere, various slightly spoofy, schlocky YouTube style ads, which and that's the moment of sort of confrontation. And at the end of that, you leave that space into a totally different room where there's lots of material about kind of why we've done it, how AI works, a final thought from Stephen, really meant to be something to promote dialogue. And what we found is that the people in the space really wanted to talk about what they'd been through, and wrote lots of messages on this sort of board we had. So it was great. We had about 1,000 people come through. The impact was really, I guess, about how do we think about where we are? How do we engage in the dialogue and feel part of it? But also at that critical moment to make people a little bit more interested in how kind of the arts could change, move the needle in how we think about this without it just being kind of the black and white. So I'll leave it at that, Harmeet, talk more.
Brilliant. It sounds really playful. And of course, I've done a version of it. It's actually, quite shocking. Takes your breath away, I have to say. It's a great piece of work. Thank you so much, Shahani. We're going to bring in Anting and Ian to introduce themselves. Hi. Hello. How are you both?
Hello.
Hello, hi, I'm Manting. I'm a composer and electronic musician, and I'm a East Asian woman, like with black hair and black, like a top.
Hi, I'm Ian Gallagher. I'm a creative technologist. I'm a Caucasian English man with black glasses and slightly graying hair, and we have a kind of a white background behind us.
Brilliant. And together you make the creative duo Lost Communication. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourselves and why you wanted to make Underwater from an audience and tech perspective?
Yeah, Ian and I have been working between music and technology for quite a bit of time, maybe 3-4 years, because we are interested in terms of how technology can be brought into storytelling and to reach to different people and also to give people different imagination. In the recent years, we have this project called Lost Communications, where we explore the non-human communications. So we believe, not just we believe, but where there are just a lot of life, there's a lot of sound. And our first project was focusing on trying to record and understanding bird songs. And the current one, Underwater, is starting from, we read a book called Sound of Life, and also from our past experience, we feel like underwater fish actually talk, but we didn't understand until we really go into explore and to record and how noisy life underwater is. I mean, it makes sense because they can't see each other very well underwater, but the transmission for sound underwater is actually faster. So the underwater creatures, they use a lot of a sound to communicate with each other. So underwater world is a very, very noisy world. And we are surprised by this kind of an old fish talk. This language is not everyday knowledge, not everybody kind of experience that. So we decided we are going to record them in the ambisonic form, where we brought 4 hydrophone and to take them and to put that into ambisonic format and to go down using kind of either diving, free dive, or snorkeling, or just put down a recorder under the water and to record the sound. And we want to create a work which can give people the immersive, immersed feeling of the underwater communications and the magic there. So, and Ian would tell a little bit more.
The format it's kind of a combination of 2 previous projects we did. We did a project called HomeX that was a kind of a combination of a live theatre show and an online game, and you could see the game projected into the theatre. And Lost Communications Birds was our previous project where we recorded bird songs and used AI generated visuals to kind of express the kind of the magic and wonder of that. So we brought those 2 things together, and in Underwater we use Unreal Engine to generate a 3D world that people can join from home as fish, but they can also see it in an immersive venue as an audience member. And then we have a live show where Anting's playing music and I'm driving a submarine around the underwater world. And we use generative AI to produce 3D coral, point clouds of coral, and just generally build the world using that as well.
Brilliant, thank you. You're definitely bringing with Underwater a completely sort of otherworld experience to people who wouldn't normally access it, right? Unless you go diving. So that's really, really interesting. And you're moving into second stage of development, which we'll ask you more questions about. Thank you so much. I wanted to bring Shahani back in for our next question. So Shahani, I mean, I guess the real thing to kind of pick up is that everywhere you look, on socials, on the internet, I mean, AI generated content is everywhere. So I guess the question that I wanted to ask you was, if you can no longer believe what we see or hear, why is media literacy so important? And what skills should artists and audiences develop?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think media literacy is always going to be vital, and I think for younger and younger ages, and it's I think heartening to see that even at my kids' primary school, they've started having sessions on it, which is great. And I think to some extent, kids can kind of see through what is fake and what is not, but it is scary, the amount of increasingly realistic content there is online everywhere. I think the deeper problem is that we've kind of lost trust in journalism and institutions. And, that's definitely contributing, I think, to what is, a very fractured society. I mean, there's lots of other contributions, but I think some of that is about that. There is a sense that we can't trust anything, and that we're kind of being manipulated for sort of different interests. So I do think critical thinking and some of those old-fashioned techniques of just, fact checking, really being sure about stuff before you pass it on, taking a bit of responsibility for stuff that's shared. I share less and less these days myself. I'm still lurking on these platforms, but I'm definitely sharing less. I think we're also just turning easily to LLMs these days, for things that we wouldn't have back in the day. But I think there is still this uh, need to structure robust arguments, sort of fact check, and clearly the creative AI tools are amazing as a kind of partner to have ideas with, to storyboard. There's so much time saving. I recently did a sort of virtual production course, and there's so many parts of that pipeline you can now start planning so much earlier. So in many ways, it's fantastic. But I do think you need to be aware of what some of the terms and conditions are. That goes for everything. And my daughter recently wanted to download an app called CapCut. It's a video editing app, but then it turned out that actually it's owned by ByteDance, and in their terms and conditions, they can license any material that's made on that site. Now, no kid is going to read those terms and conditions, but I think that's the other thing. And then I think it's down to artists having their own value system and operating within a framework that you feel is ethical, in line with your, what you're trying to do, because it is a really sort of complex area. But I think there will be ways and means, and I think not uploading full resolution of your artwork and things like that, not uploading the things that you really care about, perhaps is one way to start thinking about it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think like part of, you saying kind of like digging into the layers, like not being going, I'm just going to use this, but actually going, how can I check? How can I, nobody reads the T's and C's, but maybe we should start doing that. How can we kind of like just add in that layer before we go in and ahead and go and start using something? I think it's really, really important. Thank you, Shahani. I'm going to move over now to Anting and Ian. Obviously, you mentioned a couple of different processes in your intro right there about how, kind of using AI and tech was super, super important in creating this magnificent underwater environment and this live experience, so this game and this live experience. Can you tell us how AI solved genuine creative problems for you rather than simply making you faster? And how did it fall short or create new problems that you then had to also solve that you didn't anticipate?
Yeah, so I mean, as a creative technologist, like my background is in computer programming, so I have a lot of experience in that. And there are things that we made for this project that I just would never have tried to make in the first place because it would have taken months. But now with AI coding agents, I can sketch something out and get it working in a couple of days. So I've not written a line of code in the last year, I think, because I'm now just a AI agent manager, which is kind of like what my career would have gone to as a developer. That you tend to promote yourself to a manager and start managing younger people who can work faster. So now I'm doing it with AIs instead. The first thing we did was just learning about spatial audio and about the ambisonic recorder. We used like deep research to kind of like get a good understanding of the spatial audio systems. It was very difficult to find like one place to learn about that because there's a lot of marketing around different spatial audio systems. So that kind of helped us just collate everything together and understand it ourselves. And then we designed the ambisonic recorder and in Blender. So like using kind of an MCP server from the LLM that kind of connects it to Blender so that it can create 3D objects in Blender. And then we took that design to someone who then made it like based on the design. And we also like 3D printed something. So that was the start. And then one feature of the performances that we have kind of spatial audio that can output to like any speaker system. Previously, there wasn't a way to do this in Unreal, but I managed to like dig into the code, like the C++ code, and find a way to like output. It's like as many channels as we want using ambisonics and using Dante as well. This is something I wouldn't have attempted to do. And yeah, and then the more kind of generative AI thing is like we use images of coral and other underwater like creatures and stuff, either taken ourselves or prompted for, and then we use the generative AI video models to create a video of the camera moving around the object prompted by the first image. And then we can then use that video in a structure for motion model, which takes a video, like if you use your phone camera and film something, you can put that video into this model and it will give you a 3D object. So we do that, but it's with a synthetic video. So it's this real magic of just you're giving it one image and then suddenly you're plucking out a 3D object like that you can put into your game world. So that's really fun. And then
point cloud.
So the point cloud system is also like a new thing that I also wouldn't have attempted. That was like it's a custom point cloud renderer, so it goes deep into like the Unreal Engine source code, and I'm able to like render as many points as I want. And you also for the show.
And you take from like a research from kind of like an open source research paper. Some paper they got kind of like the code, and then you can take the code and then just like and then to combine and then code yourself to do the pipeline.
Yeah. So it's if you want to get to like the real cutting edge of like what's possible, you can keep an eye out for what papers are coming out, and these papers will have like a project page usually, and also a GitHub with the code, and you can download it yourself and then start using these models immediately. A lot of companies will just release that for free, and then I customize the code and tailor it to what we need.
Yeah, and I mean I'm not a coder like Ian, but like I use kind of like AI in a just enable me to code as well, which is very exciting. And although I am a musician, I compose music. I don't use AI directly to compose music, but AI enable me to create tools to composition. For example, like a Max for Life, which requires some like a coding knowledge, but kind of like I didn't really dig into that. But now kind of like can combine like kind of like the code just like a source, and then with the AI, and then I can start to kind of like create a structure with code with the support from AI. And I also I'm actually really embedded with the support from AI as well, but it's more kind of like we start to develop a lot of like a writing about a project. So all different parts of the management of the project in terms of like what is a project, what is structure, and what do we want to achieve, and what is the finance part and marketing plan, and all of them we save kind of in the GitHub. And we both use different AI to support us because we want to know more about it. And I mean, Ian is using like a Codex and Claude, right? Yeah. And then I'm using like DeepSeek, which is an open source one. So the price for open DeepSeek is like so much lower. So, but I would really encourage everyone to do not just like the web page one, but incorporate that into the computer. So use the agent one. So I have a deep agent. I call it deep agent, but it's DeepSeek. Kind of like I use a terminal to code it out and then connect it to the GitHub where the ones we share them. So they actually asked me, I mean, they asked me, but I decide like I need to write a lot of things. And also Ian write a lot of things. I write a lot about project. And then our brand about the project is kind of like inside of this GitHub. And then whenever we want to develop thing or organize thing, this like a DeepSeek will help about doing this. So I think one of the very important thing for me to use AI is like AI doesn't know what we actually want. So like we know what we want. And I think in like using AI actually enable us to you really need to think, what is the vision of the project? What do you want to achieve? Because if we don't want to do that, they are just like produce a lot of like nonsense. And the work is actually become more because they can generate so many nonsense like a slot kind of like constantly, but only if you really know when we really know what we want to do, and then they can generate like something real really like a impactful kind of response to our creativity.
Yeah, the less information you give it, the more generic the output will be.
Yeah, so we have a big like a database about our project, and then AI kind of like have this, and then to extend it, and then to kind of like to think with us, to organize and manage with us. So that's kind of like that's really useful in terms of like responding to our creativity in this way as well.
Fascinating. There's so many things that I want to kind of pick up on. Ian, you said you haven't written a line of code for over a year. I find that extraordinary. But you've become like a manager to like a team of like young teenage AI, developers, as it were. That's really interesting. It also sounds like when you set out to make Underwater, you decided to go all in, right? You didn't just kind of like play with a lot of things. You used AI across the board. You had it deeply integrated into your processes, right from management, marketing, like you were saying, world building, coding. You went all in, go big or go home, right? Which I think is fascinating. There must be lots and lots of things that you picked up and that you are changing as a result of that. But I really like what you say, Anting, that actually it doesn't know what you want to achieve. I'm going to bring Alan in. So, there'll be a lot of artists, out there and on this webinar who really do want to use AI, but probably kind of like not sure. How can artists maintain integrity and still use it?
So that's a big question, and I do think that there's a lot of different approaches. There's room for refusal, of course, and various degrees of engagement, but overall, I think we just need to be extremely careful, because right now, the most visible uses of AI are the most low quality, wasteful, unoriginal, and opportunistic uses. And that's what we call AI slop. And a lot of the kind of public opinion about AI is based off AI slop. But of course, there are many other artists using AI carefully with sensitivity. And just the other day, I saw a clip online where an animation director at the Annecy Film Festival, which is an animation film festival in France, was heckled and booed and humiliated basically by a whole cinema, despite his film being made with a very precise and minimal amount of AI, despite the fact that he'd employed huge numbers of skilled craftspeople. And to me, this speaks to a lack of nuance at the moment. And I think that's worth bearing in mind, especially for those of us who've been working in the creative industries for decades and whose labor has fed the AI models. I do believe that we have, those who are invested in this industry, have some legal and moral claim to use these models, especially compared to those who are making AI slop, at least. So I sort of resent the idea that out of work artists should be expected to be these kind of ethically pure individuals. And I really don't think it's fair to demonize artists who've had their work scraped and are subsisting on tiny incomes and are trying to do things the right way, while the people who created this problem in the first place fly around the world in private jets. So I think like AI essentially belongs to us in many ways. But in regards to your question about sort of integrity and maybe how I try and maintain integrity within my own practice. So my latest film, Image Empire, doesn't use AI, but it is kind of about AI. So it's based off applied understanding and research. I've interrogated AI, and I think you can do this. I think you can make work about AI without using it or trying to make a quick buck off it. And I saw my film Image Empire as a kind of public information film in the style of those kind of classic state-produced public information films of the 20th century. So even if work isn't made using AI, it can still contribute productively to the conversation around AI. And of course, to say anything useful, you do have to have some hands-on experience of using the tech critically. And for me, that's involved using Comfy UI, which is a local kind of AI engine that allows you to avoid feeding these kind of subscription models. It has less environmental impacts because you're using it locally. It's using around about the same amount of energy as rendering did, CGI rendering, and it doesn't scrape what you produce. So that would be, I guess, my tip around integrity.
Yeah, that's really interesting, kind of like acknowledging that you can kind of only maybe work out what feels right for you, and to have a practice that, has the right levels of integrity, how you choose to want to use that if you kind of dip your toe in and start working on something. And you mentioned Comfy UI, which is a open source visual based tool, right? There's lots of kind of attention around this at the moment because it's released Comfy UI MCP, which is an open source tool, and it allows you to, tell me if I'm wrong here, Alan, it allows you to not just put a prompt in to create a visual response, but you have control over each single visual node. So it actually lets you manipulate every single section of what's coming out. So you have far greater creative control over what you're making, and it's open source. So it's not behind a closed software system that is being made by the big guys to make money.
Yeah. So there's hundreds of different AI models that all do more or less the same thing. And some of the best ones are run by the biggest companies. So OpenAI, Google, etc. But there are other models which are free to use and that you can download onto your machine, and you can run them locally. And yes, you can make these kind of quite complex production chains where, other artists are calling this kind of protocol-based art, where you're essentially setting up a system to create outputs, and the other artists in this call are doing the same thing. So yeah, Comfy UI, really super complex, huge steep learning curve. I wouldn't recommend it for everyone, but it does allow for a huge amount of flexibility, and it is kind of mind-blowing. I still don't think that I personally am ready to make a feature film or even a short film using that technology. And it still does have, serious concerns, ethical concerns that accompany using it. So that's why I say we really just still have to be very careful and very judicious in how you're using this, and also careful about, if you make something that you like, expect that if you release that, you're going to get a lot of pushback. And that's just part of the game. I'm not particularly interested in being publicly cancelled. So I keep it to a kind of, I'm very mindful about my use of it and sharing what I think about it.
That's really, really interesting. I just want to add in, like, from my own personal experience, just listening to what you're saying, Alan, and picking up on what Anting, Ian, and Shahani have said in the past. I know, for example, Ian, when you were talking about, like, you can, take a piece of 2D footage and then take it through, a program to pull out the point clouds and make it into a 3D object. It doesn't sound creatively very interesting, but having, like, worked with archive footage for one of the VR projects that I made, and realizing just how much time and money we spent on, animators rotoscoping 2D images and film, and then stabilizing that footage to spatialize it. It wasn't a creative process at all. There was nothing creative that animator was doing, but they had to spend days doing it just so that we could then spatialize it to put it into a VR piece, into Unreal. And that was like 3 years ago. If we had the kind of tools, if I had access now, then to the tools now, actually we could have done that so much quicker, so much cheaper. But also, the question of, does that remove some creative labor, is kind of what I think is, like, is that a creative part of the process because it's not like front end creative, or is that okay because it's a pipeline or a process that ends that results to the end point in the creative thing that you're making? So I think you don't have to answer. I think that's just some of the things that I think about when I go, am I going to use, like, AI to make the next thing that I'm making? Should I dip my toe in, and how do I do it better? Or think in a more conscientious way about the tools that I might use if I'm going to do that, just as Alan said. Is there anything else that any of you wanted to jump in and say on the back of that rather huge question that I put to Alan?
I mean, I'll jump in and say, I also recently made a mixed reality experience last year called Built by Sound, which was in Bradford. And we did use AI in various ways for kind of workflow. So in one instance, we brought some archive photographs to life. We kind of talked long and hard to the archive that supplied them. They were kind of portraits from the Bellevue collection, for very well known. People feel very close to those portraits, the big story in Bradford. And so, we talked to the curators about the ethical use of that. But we also said we would only do it if we could find a living relative of those people in the photographs. So a long old process, we'd go through sort of reams of archives to then trace someone that they might have had contact for, to then get their approval, showed them how it was being used and the context, etc. And we did it that way. And then similarly, we use like Move AI, which, in terms of motion capture, is sort of a game changer if you're doing something fairly basic. And we just needed, a bit of kind of movement of characters and things. But, we just did that in the studio on our phone to get some kind of character skeletal movement. So I think there are these areas where you can save an awful lot of time. It's just again just thinking about the bigger picture, and we had kind of policies in place talking about how we were going to use AI through the whole process.
Brilliant. Thank you,
Yeah,
Shani. That's really insightful. Go on, Ian.
Like taking away the work from the pipeline and all the kind of like the real, it might take away some of the craft, but you end up busier than ever because there's just more things to do. It's kind of like we're taking away some jobs, but then those jobs move to something else. And yeah, with our projects, it's like there's always just more to do. We're actually busier than we were before, I think.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I think it's quite interesting for me to look at Ian does things, because I am a composer. I don't use AI in terms of my music composition process. And Ian is a creative technology. He used AI really into his work. But fundamentally, I feel our challenges are the same. It's just like I compose the music with a lot of like learning, a lot of existing sound, a lot of like styles, genres, and this kind of thing. And what I really need to compose is what I want to express, what a unique experience I try to convey like in the work. And what Ian, he is like, I see him using a different tools, kind of like, how to do the pipeline and to do a different cloud. Fundamentally, essentially, eventually, he just want to create a magic, which we create the magic together for people to join in. So in a way, it's like we are talking about like the middle way, kind of like what is the tool we are using. And I think things like we move from like playing the piano to like Ableton, kind of like just a digital workstation, this kind of thing. It has already been carry on being the automated kind of like a process. So I feel this is like I feel kind of like if when I run across with like a AI composer, like using AI composer, my question would just be, what is your thing which can touch me? I think it's fundamentally what arts should convey is similar thing, instead of like I even think it's make it clearer about what is a good art. What do we differentiate ourselves from the tool we are using? Because that's the end goal. What is the thing we want to convey? And that's why I feel it's actually clearer. And a lot of like, which is just we use that in order to just get a little bit of money. That's financial, really.
Yeah, in a way, we were already filled with slot. There were like very efficient ways of making slot before AI. Now AI's just made it even more efficient, and I think it gets to the point where either people will just switch off from social media and go touch some grass and talk to real people, and maybe we'll like kind of appreciate kind of the real intentional art instead of the slot cannon.
Brilliant. Thank you very much to all of you. I really like the fact that, Anting, you don't use it at all to compose your music. So you have already protected that part of your art form. That's fascinating. And also, actually, it can be useful, but there's certain ways of using it, I guess. I also want to touch on, Anting, what you just said about like this. It's, you're using it to kind of like get to an end point as an experience to try and express something new. And certainly, I know that in the projects that I've used it for, it hasn't been able to replicate, that very nuanced complex human behavior, you know, the kind of things that make things, you know, connect and make things sticky for people. So there's still quite a long way to go, but fascinating to hear how you are all using it with a little bit of sort of a critical kind of viewpoint. That's really, really interesting. Ben made a comment. And he said, at the risk of putting myself and others like Ian out of work, the main AI developments IDEs are Cursor, Codex, and Claude Code. These are the AI agents that make up your team of supercharged coders who can create for you. Amazing, excellent. Thank you for that. That's really good. I'm not going to go near any of those, but thank you for telling us what they are. And then Ben goes on to say, people relate and want to relate to other people. No one admires calculators for doing complex maths. I dare you, Ben, to say that to an accountant. That's what I'm going to say. So, Anting and Ian, I'm going to go to you two first. So you've used a lot of AI tools and processes in your work that you're doing. Do you think AI is democratizing creativity, or is it concentrating power in the hands of a few technology companies? Another big question.
Yeah, this is very big question. This is like something we are talking between us like every day, because I think both are correct in a way. So like, I mean, I will start with the democratizing part. And I think for my experience on AI really empower me to do a lot of things I wouldn't have been able to do. So like the first thing is about the research, the amount of like things I've been learning in this like a half year, this particular half year, because I think since like we have this kind of like integrated AI, I mean the AI able to go into the system, I think that's a real change. I mean, Ben was mentioning about the Claude Codex, but there's so many more than that. So example, I use like DeepSeek, there's like GLM, and there's so many different models which you can use, like which can kind of like you have the whole computer as the material for the AI to have. I mean,
so
a computer.
You download it onto your computer and then it runs as an agent on your computer.
Yeah, so it's kind of so it has my knowledge, whatever the knowledge I put into the computer. So then combining with what I know, and the AI told me so much I don't know. And also it's kind of like I feel we have always been in this computer system, the technologies age already, but AI enabled me to learn things behind. Just like I feel as a non-coder before. I mean, Ian always a little bit more into that because he's a coder, but I wasn't. I'm not a coder, but now I can learn as long as I want to learn. I actually have access to learn about a lot of things. And the second thing is about the scale we can do. Like for us, like we always kind of like believe in individuality. Like we feel we can do big things, which is like even we're two small independent people, not a big corporate company. We always believe in kind of things can start small. And I think now you really can do it because, for example, we are creating fundamentally a live performance work as well as a game, which is like a super ambitious, like for two people to do. And before, when we were working on our previous project, HomeX, I would say, I mean, it's a good work. I think it's great. But the testing process has never been able to really done very thoroughly because I was also running a small company to do that. It's just really, really difficult. But now the difference is like we can just after our testing for underwater, we can collect all the log report, kind of the clashing, kind of like all the users' experience, like whatever they have the record, kind of a log record on their computer, and we ask to put it all to the AI, and they can analyze it, and then we can really analyze about what's people's experience in the game, and also plus like some other thing, kind of like the experience like people put in. But the main thing is about they can analyze the code. So that's just not the scale we could have done before. And so for these points, I feel AI really democratizing people to be able to empower people to be able to learn more about the world and to do more than what you could have done before. I feel there's more access-wise. There's just like more things I am able to read instead of like I need to have certain education or I need to have certain like access to some part of the world I as a East Asian woman or whatever, I just am not having this access to it. And now the access is much more. But there's also a lot of like the other thing about whether this become like a big company, corporate, like a problem. That's also true, right?
Yeah, I mean, like I guess we all probably remember like how the rise of social media decimated the local newspapers and all the kind of like the local press, because of all the money from advertising suddenly just kind of all started being funneled towards Silicon Valley. And like there's obviously a danger that that kind of thing happens again, but with like replacing like many different kinds of jobs with the money kind of flowing in one direction. I think there's one bit of hope with that, is that the previous like social media models, they were like social media systems were they were sticky and they had network effects, and it meant that there was not a lot of competition once they'd grown to a certain size. But I think with the AI models, it's slightly different, because there's so much competition between the model builders themselves, and it seems to be when you train the model that like to a certain standard, it's kind of the same as the other ones. So the models are being commoditized. It's very easy to switch from OpenAI to Anthropic to an open source model as well. And so hopefully the value will accrue to like people using it rather than the model builders themselves. But I mean, that remains to be seen. And then there's also like slightly worrying moves towards kind of using regulations to protect themselves. So like Anthropic putting guardrails around their latest model, and they've started kind of talking about how open source models are dangerous and people shouldn't be using them potentially in the future. Like these are kind of worrying trends where like they might try to keep more of the power rather than it being democratized.
Yeah, and I think it's absolutely the most scary part is at least kind of like a big corporate, like kind of like holding so much power, and they can decide who can access it. Just like OpenAI also decided kind of like not to have people accessing their latest model, this kind of stuff. That's like, but I feel this is kind of like just like a whatever like our capitalism kind of society is pushing towards. This is not the news. This is just like we are like the society is pushing towards like the big company kind of like holding more resource and holding more decision, and then kind of like the world is held by that. I think that's kind of like the AI is kind of like a current combination of this effect, kind of like the big corporate is holding that.
The only way that AI could have been trained was by like there being about a couple of decades of people putting all their data onto the internet, and now like it's kind of a logical continuation of that, right? It's like everyone put all the data on there, and now we've found a way to like compress it into something that can use that. And
yeah, but so that I feel just like, although kind of I am also thinking about this, I'm also really, really scared of this like a big corporate to occupy the space. But the good thing is like there's competition. There's so much competition going on. And for my perspective, as I mentioned, I feel AI enabled me to learn a lot more. I'd rather to think it's better still to learn more things instead of like give up in front of corporate. Because I mean, Ian and I, we always are kind of like want to keep our individuality. We always feel like a big company is absolutely not a place that we want to go. So we always hope individuality have a place and have a power we can hold like here. And then for me, at this moment, I still feel AI could enable this instead of like disable this part, because the problem is there already. And then now I guess we just need to learn as much as we could when we still have access, and then try to just having the people kind of where we have the like-minded, not kind of whether we like AI or not, but just whether we believe in individuality kind of versus like big corporate, we kind of like gather our own power. And so I think open source and then different models, they are all good things to do. So just definitely not just like fix the the eyes only on those big things like Google Cloud and so kind of like OpenAI, because they are monsters. And there are a lot of like small ones, and then there's a lot of open source community. I mean, we decide like our things, we are also going to do like open source afterwards as well.
Yeah.
So like, so, and then just like to share as much as we can, as I think that's what we as people who believe in individual who can currently do. But there's definitely fact, which is like the big monster is on our head. And
I'd say you don't hate AI, you just hate capitalism.
yes, something like that, I think.
That's super, super interesting. And it's so tempting, right? It's really, really tempting to go to the market leaders of anything, right? Not just AI tools and LLMs, but anything, right? Something breaks into the market first, it gets all the attention, and we go straight to it. And then actually they tend to get like a big market share because they're the ones that are first to market. But actually hearing from what you're both saying, that although there's there's the big three, there's OpenAI, there's Anthropic, and there's Gemini, so deep mind as well from Google. There's actually still a lot of choice in the open source offers that are out there, whether that's LLMs, whether that's tools, whether it's Gen I tools, and I think what I'm hearing from both of you, and I've heard also from the others as well, is that in a way, the depth of learning that you've had to do to kind of integrate this into your processes in particular, you've had to make sure you're doing your due diligence to kind of check that it works for you, right? And actually, that's a really good way of thinking, well, actually, I do that with everything else, right? I'm not going to go and buy insurance until I've checked out lots of different insurance providers, or I'm not going to go and do X before I've gone and seen what's on offer in the market. So why would we not have the same relationship when we're looking at all of the different large language models, or we're looking at different Gen AI tools, to help us with, video production, music production, whatever, whatever the thing is we're looking for, there's always going to be an open source offer out there. And I kind of like think actually that's super, super interesting, because it harks back to like, the kind of subcultures of like the hacker movements, like where does innovation really comes from? It comes from communities of people, creative technologists, artists, musicians, whatever, kind of going, there's something doesn't quite fit, or we want to take ownership of something that's broken into the market first so that we can leverage how we use it and it can be more fairer. And actually, I think that's super, super interesting, saying that we can't maybe necessarily challenge big power, but we can use our individual power to make better choices. And that's super, super interesting. I'm definitely going to take that on board to make more considered choices. Thank you. I want to go to Alan. So that was a very, very long kind of like response to your response. Alan, you did a PhD on the properties of technical labor in the creative industries. And, you've mentioned to me that AI is the next frontier of that industrialization. Does that mean that the last bastions of creative, genuine craft-based creativity will disappear?
Again, you're coming at me with the really hard questions, Harmeet.
Sorry.
So one of the things that I looked at in my PhD is how professional creatives for decades have essentially been an outsourced R&D department for software and hardware companies. And this is sort of contrary to the idea that all we do is just click buttons or drag and drop things together. I was kind of looking at, from my own experience working in industry for 2 decades, that we're actually the ones who standardize and optimize these tools, who join together pieces of software that don't necessarily talk to each other. We bug fix dodgy hardware, and we forge functionality from all the half-broken software and hardware ecosystems. So from that perspective, we didn't just build AI models with our work. We also built all the digital tools. We built game worlds and metaverses and creative suites, and they've all been sold back to us. So in that sense, AI is sort of just the climax of a longer process of extraction. So maybe not the next frontier of industrialization, but the inevitable conclusion of a bigger digital story. And regarding craft and creativity, obviously these things will continue. We will always be creative, but if there's fewer jobs and people are poorer, it's likely that art and design will become a hobby, essentially, things that we do as passion projects in our shed or our garage. And then this whole idea that artists are this sort of like self-supporting section of productive society starts to crumble, and really the only thing that saves us in that instance is universal basic income. So this whole issue of AI, as many of us already know, only amplifies pre-existing political questions, and then those start to splash back onto arts organizations and artists who have been comfortable in the past with the tensions and contradictions in their work. So my question is, maybe do we have to deal with those tensions and contradictions more directly now? So yeah, I think that's, I do see an obvious future for craft and creativity, but the way that we're rewarded for it changes, and I can't see a way out of that, really.
Okay. That was a little bit disheartening to hear, I think.
Well, I'm sorry. Like, we have to deal with the elephant in the room, which is there are a lot of people computing some really hard questions now, rethinking the career choices that they've made. And, you know, I persist in being an artist, but it's got the political questions that I have to deal with now are so much more amplified than they ever have been. And I want to talk about them with people. You know, I want that to be a real conversation and a transition from one mode of arts practice to another. And as I say, universal basic income could be liberatory. So
yeah,
I might just jump in, Tommy, because I mean, I see where you're coming from, Alan, but I also think that, as Antigone said, is that people are desperate for connection as well. I think they're desperate for live experiences and being with people and live music and, you know, and painting and actually the kind of act of like something made by the hand. And I'm not saying necessarily that you can live off that all the time, depending on what level of artist you are, but I feel kind of optimistic that there will be a kind of resurgence into actually appreciating that handmade thing. You know, I do feel there will be a kind of backlash at some point, or at least interest groups which, you know, really want to kind of explore that.
I think
And
it's
that's not
already happened. Like students in higher education in the arts are all really pivoting back towards the handmade, towards making zines, towards labor and craft. The issue is we can encourage that, but it may, as I say, become more of a hobby, because if jobs are scarcer, if AI automates things, then we have less disposable income. And while we might appreciate these things, we may not be able to afford to pay those people. So I think, you know, my home is filled with beautiful crafts that are affordable, but yeah, I have a big passion for that kind of work, for handmade animation. That's what I did with Image Empire. So I do think that is a kind of cultural swing that we're experiencing to revalue those things, but I'm not sure if it's a sustainable cultural swing.
yeah.
And that's just a kind of pragmatic concern. Like, I would like to make that happen, but it requires economic changes, you know, policy changes.
Yeah, I think you both make really interesting points, you know, like it raises bigger questions, not just about like what is the future of creativity if we all start using, you know, AI tools to make things, and what does, you know, what does that mean in terms of future jobs, but also actually what is the value of culture itself. So, you know, Alan, you saying we need basic universal income to kind of support that. I mean, yes, absolutely. That would be that would be a great shift towards helping all of us working in the arts and cultural sector to be able to sustain the creative practices that we've loved deeply for many a decade since we went to art school and decided to like stay on that path rather than go down a different path, you know. And I also think, Shahani, you're absolutely right. I think people want more live in-person experiences. I can't quite remember where I saw it, where I read it, but there was something that I read last year about how for the first time in about I don't know, a decade, about like since, the rise of social media and digital interaction, it's kind of plateauing off ever so slightly, especially with like, kind of like the up and coming generations. I don't know if that's just a little blip or if that will continue to plateau and come off. But actually, I think you're right, Shahani. I think more people need those in-person live experiences, and therefore you can't ever remove the human. Um, Even though we've seen what those G1 Geminoid robots look like, and maybe that might happen, but we don't have to worry about that yet. That's not anything we need to worry about right now. Um, Coming back to you, Shahani, I have a question for you. In Vocalize, you used real people's data and voices. How did you keep your audiences safe? And what did that process teach you about the risks artists are taking right now, often without realizing?
Yeah, I mean, we thought about that long and hard actually, because we were aware, obviously, that we're taking a sample of your voice. So how it works is we take 30 seconds of one of the scripts that you read, just the first one, and in the background, as the experience carries on and you're chatting to Stephen, we're using an API from 11 Labs. We're using ChatGPT to stitch it together, and out it pops. But we did kind of dig into sort of ticking the box that none of those voices get used for kind of further training, and then all the data gets deleted after you finish the experience. There's a little bit at the end where you can download a kind of funny little 30-second trailer for yourself if you want to keep that and take it away as a QR code, and you can download it. Everything else then afterwards gets deleted. And there was a terms and conditions box actually. We thought long and hard. We were like, we need to give people a moment of consent at the beginning. And of course, people just blindly tick it. But if you do read it, it is 11 Labs' terms and conditions, so you can go with your eyes open, and there is an about page where if you suddenly get scared, you can read about it and see that it's a spoof. I mean, none of this really happened in the session because we had kind of mediated by kind of actors who, it feels much more theatrical really in person. But we did really want to kind of think about all those steps as you went through it. So yeah, I mean, I guess in terms of risks that artists are taking right now, I think it goes back to just being judicious, being really careful, thinking about your audience in particular. If you are using other people's data, sometimes it's movement data, sometimes it's, camera data. I mean, I did a very unnerving piece at IDFA Doc Lab in Amsterdam a few years ago, which was called AI and Me, where you spent like 3 minutes in front of a camera, sort of like a robot thing, and it's meant to read your face, and it tells you what it thinks of you, but flashing these pictures up. And there were sort of odd images that came out of it. Some of them, made you more attractive, less attractive. But occasionally, and this happened to lots of people, it flashed a picture of you nude. So it was literally like the kind of grok undressing technology. And only you see it, you're in a little darkened room. But equally, I don't know what happened to that image, if it went into some sort of festival system. But it was pretty affronting. And yeah, I mean that, there we go. These things are out there. And I guess we've got a whole army of smart glasses coming to market, which all have cameras, which can't deal, that the legal system hasn't really dealt with how things will be recorded without you having any idea at all. I mean, there's barely a flashing light on it to show that people are recording. And yeah, so I think privacy and, your own personal data is something to be wary of, and just be as safe as you can.
Yeah, that's
Terrible answer. That's
fascinating.
all I can
No,
say.
because I think actually what it speaks of is, as a maker, you were a team of people and you've been working, at the sharp end of tech, for quite a number of years, working in immersive. So actually you kind of already were thinking about what that user experience needed to be. Adding an AI level meant that you had to kind of think about that data and privacy level even more, be really explicit about it from the start because you knew you had to scrape some data from people. And I think maybe as makers and creatives, certainly it's kind of like what I think about too, is like actually of making this experience, I have to be really transparent about what I'm using, especially if I am going to use people's data in any way, shape, or form, because then people have a choice as to whether or not to opt out. And I think that's a really conscientious way of thinking about how you make work, which is at the sharp end of tech, and you did it in a really ethical way that made sure people knew exactly what they were doing, what they were signing up for, and that actually they could delete. It was going to be deleted. There wasn't going to be like the shocking moments of revelation at the end. And then, like you say, you don't know what's happened with your image or your voice, like the piece that, at the festival. So, um, I think that's
Yeah, and
really.
I think we also thought there was a phase where we thought about asking you a lot more personal questions at the beginning, so that actually what we tailored for you at the end could be more shocking, and that could be your political views or your age or various things. Actually, in the end, we were like, you know what, we're not going to do that. We don't need to have this information or store this information or really do anything with it. And the piece kind of works without it. So,
Mm.
I think you can kind of make a balance of what you really need for something to work or not.
Yeah, and maybe actually audiences do want that transparency, even if your data isn't being used. Maybe audiences just want to know, that I think that layer of transparency maybe hasn't kind of like sit in, or like it's the owner's, it's the maker's responsibility. I was reading an article about 11 Labs actually, that they've just started a partnership with, I feel like I'm going to say it's DeepMind, so it's one of Google's like main AI departments, to start creating digital watermarks in all of the audio that you produce with 11 Labs, and even if you cut it, edit it, remove the metadata, that watermark is there to prove that it is AI generated, and not real. And I think that's more about like being transparent, that actually things are going to get more and more real, and less, you're less likely to notice if it's made by AI or not. So I think that's also a positive step in like how the people making the tech are also becoming a little bit more accountable, perhaps. But I think that's really important, thinking about what the audience's needs are, how much they need to know, and how you keep them safe, right? That's
And
vital.
actually, that reminds me. So we had a little partnership with an organization called Numbers Protocol, and we did use some digital watermarking. So in the little thing that you take away, the little trailer, as it's getting encoded, we encode it with this digital watermark. So if it turned up on social media or people were really, whatever, you could sort of trace it. I mean, there are all these other protocols, C2PA for images and things. It's still, there's some protection. I'm not sure how much, but I think that will start to become a thing. And I see Adobe's also involved in trying to back something called the Creator Act in America, which has just come out in June, which they're lobbying for, which gives you protection if your style is being copied. So say you're David Hockney or whatever, and it's just blatantly being kind of copied. It's meant to have some sort of recourse to the legal system. We'll see if that comes off or not.
So positive steps, even though the horse has already bolted, maybe an attempt to tame what is already out there. We're running a little bit over, but I think it'd be really good, and we are going to have seen the questions in the chat, which we'll come to in a minute. It'd be really good to hear from all three of you. And just to kind of say, like, there's lots of artists that may kind of go, great, that was really interesting. I think I do want to dip my toe in the water, or actually I just need to think about things a bit more. What would be your sort of key takeaways, or like kind of a top tip or recommendation for artists who might want to go and use AI after this session? I will let whichever one of you wants to jump in first.
So jumping first. So my top tip is like I think look at many different models instead of like being restricted to one. Do more research about it, and always remember what you want to do instead of being controlled by AI. That's my takeaway.
My takeaway would be like these models that they're trained on so much data, and it's all kind of compressed into like this latent space where if you don't push it out of the kind of average, it'll just give you an average output. If you these models have very weird kind of parts to them. If you can find those weird parts, they can make some very interesting things out of it. But also just, the more stuff that you put in, the more of your own creativity, the more of your own like information and tailoring that you put in, the more you'll get out from it.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Anyone else?
Mine.
Yeah.
Oh, go on, go on.
So I'd say, contrary to the full-on anti-AI crowd, I'd say that journalists and artists and researchers with an interest in digital media have a moral responsibility to understand AI, and there's good and bad ways of engaging with it. And I'd say experiment with open weights or local AI, try not to feed the bubble with subscriptions, and keep a ethnographic hat on, because this is kind of the Wild West and there's a lot of dodgy practices.
And I was going to say, I think you can also dig into how all these tools, how you can switch off the training data kind of button fairly easily. In fact, an LLM will tell you how to do it. So it's worth doing a little audit, I think, of all the kind of online digital tools you're using. And I think also, I think stop to kind of think before you just reach for the LLMs to answer questions, whether that's, finding applications or CVs, or I think people are starting to be able to see through the stuff that comes out, which can be very, very generic, and as Ian says, just the more specific you can be in terms of your inputs, you're going to get much more interesting outputs, but don't totally outsource all the thinking.
Brilliant. Love it. Thank you so much. I really like the ask the large language model how you can switch off its own features. That's absolutely brilliant. Definitely need to do that. There's a few questions in the chat that we're going to answer before we wrap. So we've got a question here from Ivor, who says, I'm interested in how the panelists balance their use of AI with the probable fact that the vast majority of models, including open source and or local models, will include unlicensed training data. The genie's out of the bottle, and we're in the Wild West Napster era, so it's not going away. What would need to be in place to make AI use feel acceptable? Fully licensed training sets? Is that ever possible? So that's a huge kind of reflection and set of questions. Anybody want to try and bite the head off that hydra?
I would say, so that a lot of this data has gone into training the models how to generate like the real world and like how to generate things in general. And then there's also certain styles that have got in there. So I mean, definitely the worst thing you can possibly do is prompt for a certain artist style. Just obviously never do that, but because that's in there. But like you can also there's a sense of like just if your intention is right, then you can get stuff out that isn't like just some copy of someone else's work. It's more of like it's understood the concept. And about the kind of genie out the bottle, I know that there is a version of ByteDance's new video model. It's called Sea Dance. Like they have a thing called Volcano Arc, which apparently they're starting to look at paying rights holders for their IP. But yeah, that's something to look at.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. That's really, really useful. Shahani, did you want to add anything? That's okay.
No, sorry.
No, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's tricky. Obviously 11 is built on a whole load of probably unlicensed voice models taken from films, books, audiobooks. I mean, Stephen Fry, I think had all of his Harry Potter books used as source material. But I think, there are interesting cases of visual artists and photographers and things who are creating their own systems, uploading their own work, and you've got a kind of model trained on your own stuff and and generating really interesting things from that. I saw a video about a designer who's making sort of lights recently, and they, it's very much a closed system where they're using their own kind of processes to then generate new designs and 3D models and things. So I do think there's something interesting in that.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think I just want to refer back to what Alan said about like, well, I don't know if you mentioned it now or maybe on a different conversation, but you said that you're also protecting some of the work that you were making that you really care about, which I think is really interesting. So not necessarily putting it out to be available on the internet. Maybe that's like a kind of thing that we all need to think about, is how we protect that data. So Tim Berners-Lee is currently doing that with his current project. He's been trying to do that for 8 years with Solid, which is a kind of like a new way of thinking about how we own our own personal data. I think it's in prototype stages, but absolutely, if we can kind of like protect our data, then hopefully the training material for all of this stuff will only be licensed. But I guess it won't, because it's the internet, so, and we leak it everywhere. Another question from Lucy: how, as an art gallery, can we support audiences in understanding how their interaction with an exhibition is used? I feel like we might need some more information, Lucy, but let's see if any of the artists can answer that. That was at 12:15. How, as an art gallery, can we support audiences and in understanding how their interaction with an exhibition is used?
Is that if it uses AI within the piece, I guess? I mean, I don't, that's sort of how I read it, if it's a kind of exhibit that's using AI or using public
Data. So Lucy's
data.
put data gathering within a digital space.
I think you've just got to be really upfront and clear, don't you? I mean, you need signs on the wall, and or if you're booking a ticket, you need to be told at the point of booking that you're being filmed or that there's cameras, or and I think that it's fairly standard practice, that I can remember where that's happening, or that cameras are going to be filming you. And I guess again you can opt out, but having clear labels on each piece, if people don't want to engage with it, they don't.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think you just have to be really, really like clear about what you're using, what you're taking, what you're scraping, and what you're using it for. And then that way audiences can make an informed choice.
And also maybe what tools, that piece is using. I think people like to know, if it is 11 Labs or whatever else, what is it you're using?
Brilliant. Thank you. I think we've got time for maybe one more question. Oh, Linda's just asked, can you share that example about protecting your own data? Oh, so Tim Berners-Lee is developing something called Solid. It's not released yet. I think it's in development. I've heard him talk about that for best part of 8 years. I don't know if it's cloud-based or if it's like a hard drive, like a cold drive, but basically it's something where all of your personal data would be stored. So, now how normally when you download an app or something, you're signing up to that T's and C's, and quite often there's a lot of data that's scraped off you, like if you download a mobile app or if you sign up for a subscription. The idea with Solid is that actually you decide who gets what out of your data, irrespective of what you are signing up for or paying. Kind of don't know how that system works, but it's Tim Berners-Lee, so it's obviously going to be a completely different way format thinking of like what we're currently doing. I mean, he invented the World Wide Web, so it's going to be pretty beyond our current thinking anyway. You can Google that, and you'll kind of find out a little bit more information. And I think there was one more question about let me see. I think it's quite a big question again. What free AI software can you download onto your laptop for local use? Richard's posed that question. I think kind of you need to know what you're using it for, right? What do you want the AI to do? Maybe is my first question would be, but any
I mean,
thought?
as Alan mentioned before, Comfy UI is a really good like kind of entry point into like these open source models. You can download that, and then you can download nodes that work in Comfy UI, and it's all the latest kind of open source models get developed for that. And I mean, also just searching in GitHub for things to download, if you're comfortable with that. And then, I mean, but this is more like image and video. With LLMs, you can't download it unless you have like a supercomputer at home. It's not going to be possible. Apart from like I mean, sorry, you can have like basic LLMs that you can run projects on as well, but they won't be the same level as like ChatGPT or something.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's 12:27, so it'd be great if you could fill out the evaluation link that we've just put into the chat. It literally is 5 questions and will take you less than a minute. It's a really good way of getting insight into not just finding out what you thought about the webinar, but what you might want to see when we program future webinars. So if there's lots of questions or things that you still have left unanswered, tell us what it is that you want to hear and know. That would be super, super useful. And then I just want to say a massive thank you to our extraordinary, brilliant artists, Anne Ting and Ian Gallagher, Alan Warburton, and Shahani Fernando. Thank you so much for being really open and really honest, for telling us what you're doing, or being, really, really super, super, super critical, but really transparent about what you're using and how you're using it. I think what I want to end up saying, and also what I would say is, like, if you haven't seen their work and you haven't followed them, go follow them, go look at their work. They're always producing brilliant things. Like, there's a ton of brilliant artists out there. And the more you're in that space, I think the more you'll find the confidence to find your own voice within this space, whether you're an artist or you're a curator or a producer. And I just want to end with saying, in the film 2001, A Space Odyssey, Hal, who was the AI supercomputer, famously told Dave that he wasn't going to open the spaceship's doors. So I guess as long as your AI of choice doesn't keep repeating, "I'm sorry, Dave, I'm afraid I can't do that," every time you ask it to do something interesting, we're probably going to be okay for now. But as we've heard, okay isn't enough. And really, that is what today's been about. It's up to all of us to read, to question, to use our discernment, to experiment, to break the box, to our artist activists out there, to lobby for better legislation, to look for what's missing and to call it out when we find it. The choices we make will define how we engage with this technology or choose not to. And for now, that choice is sort of still ours. And artists have always held up mirrors to reflect society back at itself. And sometimes that reflection is devastating, but it's also honest and it can be beautiful. And that doesn't change because the tools do. Like Anting said, AI cannot know what it is that you want to achieve. It cannot have your values. It won't have your lived experience. And it cannot know about what you wonder, what your dreams are, or what you wish for. So stay curious and stay critical. And if you do choose to experiment wildly with AI, document what you find. Ask the questions that no one else is asking. The world needs you, my friends. So take care of yourselves and each other.